opportunity to see, we are extremely proud of this facility and what it represents in terms of Salem's commitment both to the nonprofit community as well as to the broader community in Salem. As a champion of good works of nonprofits and a member of our city council, I welcome you to Salem. I congratulate you on getting around in town. I hope you'll go down, visit our historic downtown, the home of many nonprofits. Stop by your state capitol. Lord knows that's nonprofit at this point. And again, thank you so much for coming to Salem. We really appreciate you being here. Hope to get to address you next year, or at least have the mayor here to see you. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Chuck. Those were lovely words. And I also want to thank again the performers of the Valley Folklorico for starting off by gathering such wonderful energy and grace. It's great to be here in Salem. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Carrie Hoops. I'm the Executive Director. And welcome to our second annual meeting, 2011, the Nonprofit Association of Oregon. I'm looking forward to spending time with you this morning. And I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today as we look back at what we've accomplished as a sector, and then look ahead at the challenges we face and the important work we need to do as an association. We thank all of our friends and partners who support us through the year, and especially today's sponsors: the Alliance of Nonprofits for Insurance, Kaiser Permanente, Miller Nash, Portland General Electric, and the Standard. Let's give those folks a minute. In addition, our gratitude also goes to Cynthia Adams at the Collins Foundation, Doug Stan and Barb Gibbs at the Meyer Memorial Trust, Kit Gillum with the MJ Murdoch Charitable Trust, and the Oregon Community Foundation for their deep commitment to the success of this association over the past and coming years. By now, everyone's probably heard that Greg Chalet will be stepping down after 30 years at the helm of the Oregon Community Foundation, so I wanted to thank him in particular for his vision and support of NAO and all the resources that the trustees have committed to us and the rest of the folks. We would not be here. So again, we'd like to complete or review today's agenda. So we'll spend about 45 minutes on the annual meeting business portion. And then we have a special presentation by Cindy Comfort, who many of you may know as the co-author of the Oregon Nonprofit Handbook. We're looking back. We're going to take a quick 15-minute break. And then we have Ruth McCambridge, who's the senior editor of the Nonprofit Quarterly, here with us today, looking forward. And we're going to do a really fun group exercise with that big white piece of paper on the wall. A bit about our core services before we move on with the business agenda. I want to tell you about the things that we do to build nonprofit capacity. Each year we produce between 75 and 100 training events for nonprofit leaders and professionals. These events are planned and executed by our fabulous training team, Jennifer Enum and Kirsten Winisky. You ladies could please stand so folks can see who you are. We currently have 7 nonprofit networks that meet in Portland, Salem, Medford, and Bend, and we're planning an 8th network in Eugene. Stay tuned for that. The nonprofit networks provide regular opportunities for you to get up-to-date information on best practices in nonprofit governance and management. They're also an excellent way for folks to stay networked with each other, because we all need a new friend when we're doing this work, don't we? In addition to the networks, we offer a variety of workshops and webinars and topics that can strengthen your management skills, and we have lots of information out in the foyer, so please take time to look at those materials. Now for consulting, we've recently added to our consulting team, in addition to Guadalupe Guajardo, Bob Hazen, Cliff Jones, Donna Schmidora, and Kathy Neep, we now have a director of capacity building services, just started a few weeks ago, Carol Ford. If you folks could all stand so everyone can see who you are. board development, cross-cultural effectiveness training, executive transitions, interim staffing needs, and more. Our team works with nonprofits in all stages of development, from the startups to the established organizations needing assistance. Heading up our rural initiatives, and also new to our staff, is Amy Carlson. Where she's in the back. She works with our friends at the Florida Family Institute for Community Building to make rural communities strong nonprofit organizations to serve those communities. We also have a couple of grant-funded cohort projects supported by the Spirit Mountain Community Foundation and the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation that bring together nonprofit leaders interested in studying a particular capacity area in a peer learning community. I'd also like to introduce you to our behind-the-scenes crew, Alice Forbes, who oversees our finance and operations, Deborah Steinkoff, who oversees our development and communications activities. They work with Kim Vu, our fiscal manager, Alyssa Beddow, our communications and design coordinator, and Abe Conway, our technology manager. If you all could stand too. You've probably also met or spoken with Michaela Kennedy, our member services coordinator, and Dio Rubiani and Casey Bernard, who staff the nonprofit helpline and help coordinate all the various consulting projects. And you guys stand there standing in the back of the room. These are the faces of NAO, and I'd like you to join me in thanking them for their deep commitment to the capacity building of our states. I'd also like to acknowledge the many volunteers, in particular the presenters, who provide high-quality trainings in our networks. Many of them are in the room. I see Paula Lipstone and Paula Manley and various other folks who need us, and sometimes we really could not produce these affordable trainings without folks helping in that capacity. A bit about member benefits. You, our members, are also the faces of NAO. We are now 550 plus members strong and growing. We're up about 12% from last year, so it's huge, and you couldn't do this work without the collective voice, and that is the nonprofits. NAO offers a number of benefits that save time and money, and these include discounts to our nonprofit networks and training events, unemployment insurance, and discounts on credit card processing, teleconferencing and web conferencing, background checks, and also nonprofit publications. This year, we have a new discount for the MBL nonprofit salary survey. Didn't know about that. And I'm also pleased to announce, the next slide, we're getting ready to launch our very own job board. This is a new service that's going to give you fast and meaningful connections to qualified candidates. You can visit our membership table for more information about that as well, and how you can take advantage of that. Another benefit of membership is advocacy. We represent the sector on public policy issues that impact us broadly. You'll be learning more about advocacy and public policy work shortly when our chair of public policy, Karen Kelly Torregoza, joins us. But in the next week or so, I just want to give you a heads up that we're going to be issuing an action alert to all of our members about telling the super committee and the Congress to make no changes to the charitable deduction. So stay tuned for that. Word about logistics. If you have cell phones, if I could ask you to turn those to silence mode. Bathrooms are just out the hall and down to the left. And if you have any trouble today hearing any of our presenters, let us know. We can adjust the sound. And if you ask a question later, just try and speak up and project so everybody can hear your thoughts. Next up, I would like to introduce our new president, Rick Nitti. Rick served on the original steering committee of NAO and has been an integral part of our growth and success. In addition to his many commitments at NAO, Rick is also the executive director of the Neighborhood House in Portland. It's an organization that's been bringing needed supportive services to individuals and families in Portland for over 100 years. So I'd like to give Rick a warm welcome.
Well, thank you, Carrie, for getting us started this morning and for all that you do to make us a very successful organization. I'm being involved in NAO from the steering committee phase to the transition with tax and to this morning seeing all of you from we've got people from across the state, from southern Grants Pass to Portland and the coast out to eastern Oregon, and having all of you here, it's really great. My script says I'm Jerry Seinfeld, so but that's the wrong script. But as president, I'd like to share with you the board strategies that we have outlined for ourselves for the next 3 years. What you see up there, and you also have them in your packets on the table, is 5 broad strategies that we think will help us meet our strategic vision of building strong Oregon communities enriched by strong, healthy, nonprofit organizations. So if you haven't found it, it's page 8 on your packets. First and foremost, we aim to build nonprofit capacity and develop nonprofit leaders. Second, we grow our networks in rural and urban communities. Third, we will leverage strategic partnerships that increase our impact and influence. Fourth, we will raise our collective voice on targeted advocacy issues. And last, we will develop sustainably as an organization while fulfilling these broad strategies. Move on to the next slide. I'd like to share with you some of the accomplishments of the past year that we're particularly proud of. First, we launched our town hall series and heard almost 400 nonprofit leaders from across the state about what your top challenges are and strategies that are working on the ground. Second, we increased media exposure, not only of the direction and purpose of NEO, but also for our members. A special moment for us was the June piece in the Chronicle of Philanthropy featuring interviews with Ben nonprofit leaders. Third, we engaged elected officials about legislative initiatives that impacted the sector and established ourselves as the go-to resource for policymakers. And finally, we increased our membership by 12%. Now, I'd also like to share with you our impact as an organization in the last year. We directly served over 8,000 folks representing about 3,800 nonprofits across the state of Oregon. Those 8,000 people were executive directors, administrators, board members, development directors, fiscal officers, volunteers, and those also interested in starting up nonprofit organizations. We put on 78 training events in Portland, Salem, Eugene, Medford, and Bend. We helped over 1,000 people get free information, resources, and referrals through our nonprofit helpline. And our top-notch consulting team helped close to 450 nonprofits increase their effectiveness through strategic planning, leadership development, and much more. It's been quite a year. I also have the very lucky job of thanking our outgoing board members. This past year's accomplishments would not be possible without the commitments from these good people. Dwayne Johnson, Paul Mortimer, and Meredith Savory. So please stand if you're in the room. They really, one of the best things about being on the nonprofit board is it's just a great group of special, super intelligent people. I kind of lower the threshold. But it's really fortunate to be part of it, and one of the best young leaders and great minds in the nonprofit world, Michael Kaplan. I love at 43 that I still get called young.
Good morning. My name is Michael Kaplan. I work as the Executive Director of Cascade AIDS Project, a member of NAO, and as a board member of Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare, also a member of NAO. My role today, however, is as a board member of NAO and as the treasurer, just to give you a quick update on our finances to all of you as our members. And with that, we'll do our finances. I'm just going to do some real high level. Currently, I'm going to give you the year we just closed compared to the year we're going into. Our fiscal year ends September 30th. As you can see, we closed the year almost in the black. We had a $3,000 deficit, but we did that with our net fund balance still remaining at about $160,000. The current level of staffing, the big expense of NAO is staff, and that's our true talent. So we currently have 18 staff that are 16.5 FTE. The next year, you'll see we actually, people don't expect this from me, but this is a conservative, people don't expect conservatism from me, but this is a very conservative budget going forward in this next year. It is truly, while it shows substantial growth of a couple $100,000, it's growth that's actually already booked, meaning those are new grants and new funding that we know we have signed agreements with. And in fact, we took a very conservative approach to saying we will budget on only what we have, and if we have to revise the budget because new things come in, we'll do it at that time. The main focus has been expanding our capacity in terms of staffing, both with the hiring of a director of capacity building, but also more staffing in executive transition services, and also some administrative staff to help the staff overall so that we'll get to 19 staff ideally next year. The biggest funders in this coming year from the foundation side is the Paul G. Allen Foundation and the Ford Family Foundation, and the biggest contract being the Ford Institute for Leadership Development. On a quick breakdown on where our funding comes from, about half of it is earned revenues and half is donated. Our goal is to make it a little more earned, but the reality is the services we provide will not fund itself, and we do depend on donors to make it happen. I want you to look at sort of the second smallest slice, because while it's rather small, 5%, it's hugely significant. That 5% represents our 500 members and the dues they pay. And while really in terms of dollars, it's less than 100,000, it's key in terms of a voice when we go to Salem, when we go to government bodies, when we talk to administrators, to say, we actually are a member-based organization of over 500 nonprofits who pay dues to ensure that their voice is heard. And I want to ask you, I mean, our hope is to see that slice grow a little, and I would ask our member organizations over the next few months as they go back to talk to your sister and brother organizations and see if they are members, to encourage them to do so. But the primary other funding, of course, is revenue from our consulting services and capacity building services, with a very small slice on sales. My last job is to introduce our Chair of Public Policy, Karen Kelly Torregrosa. She's also the Executive Director of Vision Action Network in Washington County. Please welcome.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be here. Vision Action Network is also a member of NAO, and I am the new Public Policy Chair for NAO. And so I'm here today to talk to you about some of our advocacy and public policy work over the last year. So advocacy and public policy is a really important area of focus for us as a state association. It's a new area of focus for us. The past year, the Public Policy Committee established priorities for the work and responded to both national and state initiatives. On the national scene, we provided timely alerts to nonprofits across the state about IRS filings and deadlines. And we participated in Nonprofit Lobby Day, where we spoke with the Oregon Congressional Delegation about the important role nonprofits play in responding to economic challenges, both as job creators and frontline responders to the needs of the unemployed and underemployed, work that many of us are involved in. On the local level, we kicked off, as was mentioned previously, a town hall series that began an important conversation with nonprofit leaders across the state about our greatest challenges as a sector. Overwhelmingly and not surprisingly, the impact of the economic crisis was a top challenge. We also heard, though, stories of what was working on the ground well in different communities. We know from these conversations that nonprofits are innovating more and collaborating more. In addition to conversations with nonprofit leaders around the state, we also communicated with elected officials about the impact of the 2011-13 budget on nonprofits in our state. With your support, we took a stand on Senate Bill 40 to get out in front of the issue of nonprofit regulation, and we testified before House and Senate committees on a range of issues that impact our sector. Our town halls and our stance on Senate Bill 40 garnered a significant media attention, including features in both local and national news outlets. We were especially excited with our media exposure nationally. So I'd like to take a moment to, I'm looking around the room looking for her, to thank Kathleen Joy. Where is she?
She's sick.
Oh no, she didn't be there. Well, many of you know Kathleen Joy. Kathleen Joy is the previous chair of the Public Policy Committee and was the first chair of the Public Policy Committee for NAO. She has been a cheerleader, a champion for this work within NAO, and really her leadership in street smarts and getting this work off the ground has just been wonderful. It's been wonderful to work with her over the last year. So she's not here, but join me in thanking Kathleen for her work. And I just want to encourage you all to get involved in advocacy and public policy work. It's really important as a nonprofit community to do so. We are NAO is sponsoring training events to give you information and tools you need to be effective advocates. There is an upcoming training on November 5th, building nonprofit capacity for public policy engagement. It's part of the upcoming Civic Engagement Conference. Please visit the public policy table outside in the lobby for more information about this event. And also while you're there, make sure you're signed up to receive our monthly e-news so you can keep up to date on our work in this area. There's also, the NAO website is also a great resource for information, general information on public policy. So please join us in these efforts. All right, that's it for me. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Charlie LaTourette, who is the chair of NAO's Governance Committee. Charlie.
Good morning. As the chair of the Governance Committee, I am pleased to report to you on the election of our Board of Directors for 2011-2012. As of August 31st, we sent out our ballots to 425 voting members. And on the deadline of September 20th, 87 very astute members returned their ballots, and 21% of them have voted for our election. We think that's a pretty good response rate for our second year of the election. Karen Kelly-Torgrosa, the board secretary, counted the votes and announced that all 87 members had voted in favor of the slate of directors. There were no oppositions. The bylaws of the board allow us to have between 9 and 20 members. There must be representatives of 501c3 nonprofit organizations, and the majority of them, must be representatives, and directors serve terms of 1, 2, or 3 years with a maximum of 6 consecutive years. For the beginning of the year, which is officially today, there will be 16 directors, 13 of which are members of nonprofit association organizations. All nominees on this year's slate are representatives from member organizations. I would now like to introduce the members of the 2012 and 2011-2012 Board of Directors and ask each of you to stand as I read your name and remain standing, but please hold your applause until we finish the list. I'll start with our new members. All of them represent member organizations. The first, Tanya Graham, Executive Director of GEO's Institute in Ashland. Bob Lieberman, Executive Director of Southern Oregon Adolescent Society and Treatment Center from Grants Pass. Charles McGee, Executive Director of Black Parent Initiative in Portland. Chuck Sams, Executive Officer, Indian Country Conservancy, Pendleton. Brandy Tuck, Executive Director of Portland Homeless Family Solutions in Portland.
And our remaining members and board members who are here, Eloise Damrosch, Executive Director of Regional Arts and Culture Council in Portland, Mark Langseth, Executive Director of the Dream Foundation, myself, Charlie Lanthred, Executive Director of the Dental Foundation of Oregon, Janet Huerta, Executive Director of Saving Grace in Bend, Karen Kelly Torgarosa, Executive Director of Vision Action Network in Beaverton, Richard Nitti, Executive Director of the Neighborhood House in Portland, and we have 3 at-large members, Kathy Jaworski from Eugene, Kathleen Joy from Portland, and Ross Rayborn from Portland. Congratulations to all of you, and thank you for serving. You may now take down your lawn signs. Now it's the end of the official business portion of our meeting, and I have the pleasure of segueing to this next program where we're going to spend some time looking back with Cindy Comfort. Many of you know Cindy as the co-author of the Oregon Nonprofit Handbook, the Bible of Nonprofit Management, as we call it. She's the co-author of that with the tax former Executive Director Kay Soul. Cindy is an attorney who practices devoted solely to nonprofits, and she's worked for over 30 years with nonprofit organizations helping them grow. She's a graduate of Lewis and Clark Northwestern School of Law and also has a PhD in history from UCLA. Please help me welcome Cindy Comfort.
A cartoon in the Oregonian a few months ago featured a mom saying to her son, "You flunked your last history test? Nate!" And her son responding, "That test was so unfair. How am I supposed to remember stuff that happened before I was even born?" American historians find Nate's response completely unsurprising and often lament how little Americans really know about our history. But it is important that history not be forgotten. Not because, or just because, we're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past if we can't remember them, but because we're unlikely to appreciate the significance of what we're doing today if we fail to understand what shaped us. I'm going to start with a question. Most of us here, I think, identify or partly identify as Americans. I want to ask you to take a few seconds to think about what it is that you're proudest of about being an American. Just jot down or maybe remember the first 2 or 3 things that come to your mind. What are you proudest of about being an American? Okay, I asked this question of students in an American history class I taught and the students in several nonprofit law classes. I'd like to compare their answers with yours. How many people name something related to our form of government? Democracy, individual rights, our Constitution, freedom, equality, our system of law. Okay, most of us know. How many people name something related to our economy? Free markets, prosperity, the American dream? Might be a bad time to ask that right now. How many name something else? Okay, those are people, okay. Well, like so many of you, most of us seem to rate the positive aspects of our identity as Americans in features of our government or maybe our economy, which is what students in all of my classes did. Some people might list cultural traits such as individualism or diversity. Very few of us think that being American means that we're a public-minded people who want to help our world. When we tell our history, we largely overlook the remarkable role that nonprofit associations and the people in them have played in American life, doing just that. So today, I hope to persuade you to rethink your American identity. I invite you to consider that an important aspect of who we are as Americans is our drive to improve our worlds, something each of you is doing by virtue of your connection with a nonprofit entity. Voluntary associations, which is an older term for nonprofit organizations, have been important to American life since the American Revolution and before. As the tensions with Great Britain that led to the American Revolution heated up, colonial men formed themselves in voluntary associations called the Sons of Liberty, or committees of correspondence, or in the backcountry, regulators to protest and organize against the British.
After the Revolution, voluntary associations proliferated throughout the states. Visiting America in 1832, Frenchman and outside observer Alexis de Tocqueville commented on the startling role that nonprofit associations played in American life as contrasted with France and England. He said, Americans of all ages, all conditions, and all dispositions constantly form associations. Americans make associations to give entertainments, to construct churches, to diffuse books. Wherever at the head of some new undertaking, you see the government in France, or a man of rank in England. In the United States, you will be sure to find an association. Well, de Tocqueville was correct that Americans constantly form associations. Both in the 19th century and since, voluntary associations have been essential to every major social movement and reform in this country, including the abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, unionism, numerous civil rights movements, the conservation and environmental movements, and immigrant integration into American life. But as the Barkers at the Oregon State Fair say, there's more. In addition to promoting reform, nonprofit organizations operated charities and offered arts and culture, social venues, and places to worship. Nonprofit foundations such as NAO members, Meyer Memorial Trust, the Collins Foundation, and Spirit Mountain Community Foundation, among others, have provided billions of dollars in grants to support the work of other nonprofits. And there's still more. Nonprofits have been and are a lifeline for marginalized groups. Racial and ethnic groups, Native Americans, immigrants, women, and sexual minorities who were fenced out of the political process created and still create nonprofit associations to nurture community, marshal resources, and exercise power. Now look who I'm talking to. You know this. You live this. Nonprofits are a very rich part of the tapestry that is the American story. I'm going to focus on just a few strands of that heritage. Reform organizations devoted to the abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, and black civil rights, to illustrate how central nonprofits are to our history and thus to who we are. We'll look at the stories of 9 individuals, both famous and relatively unknown, who created or turned to nonprofits as a way to address the concerns of women Black Americans. These stories will show us the scope of what nonprofits do, the interconnection between the activities of various nonprofits, and the sometimes unexpected outcome of the efforts of nonprofits. Peter Williams Jr. was a free Black man born in New York City in 1786. How many people have heard of him? At that time, free Blacks in New York and Philadelphia began forming Black churches and schools to provide a space for the Black community to worship and learn, apart from the racism they were encountering in white institutions. Williams was educated at the African Free School, a nonprofit founded in 1787 by the New York Manumission Society, itself a nonprofit school that had educated several of New York's Black leaders. In 1813, Williams led a nonprofit association of Black Episcopalians that approached the Episcopal Diocesan Convention to allow a Black church and to ordain Black ministers. St. Philip's Church, that first Black church, was erected 6 years later, and Williams, upon becoming the second Black Episcopalian priest, served as its minister. Williams used his pulpit to preach anti-slavery messages. On Independence Day in 1830, he told his congregation, "No people in the world profess so high a respect for liberty and equality as the people of the United States, and yet no people hold so many slaves or make such great distinctions between man and man." His stance was more courageous than it might appear now. 4 years later, both his church and his home were almost destroyed by an anti-abolitionist mob. St. Philip's Church continues its ministry today in Harlem. Now, Williams was active in his community outside his church. He was a founding member of the American Anti-Slavery Society, which became one of the leading abolitionist organizations in the United States. And he co-founded Freedom's Journal, the first African-American newspaper in the United States. One of Williams' congregants was a woman named Isabella. Isabella was born a slave in the 1790s. Her parents were owned by a Dutch family in New York State. Her first language was Dutch. English was her second language. She was illiterate her entire life. Her parents had lost at least 8 of her older siblings who had been sold on the slave market as children. When she was 9 years old, she was taken from her family and sold to an English-speaking couple. Her childhood was marked by considerable physical abuse, in part because she couldn't understand English commands, and also sexual abuse. She freed herself in 1826, shortly before her freedom would have been required under New York's gradual emancipation law. She left because she heard the voice of God directing her to leave. Isabella went to New York City, where she joined Peter William Jr.'s church and found a larger community of reformers actively opposed to slavery and engaged in many of the reform movements of the day. In 1843, Isabella changed her name to Sojourner Truth. She dictated a widely circulated book about her experiences in slavery and participated in the American Anti-Slavery Society, which we just saw, giving many lectures around the North on ending slavery. The groundwork laid by Peter Williams Jr., Sojourner Truth, the American Anti-Slavery Society, and thousands of other individuals working in numerous nonprofit organizations eventually led to the emancipation of more than 4 million enslaved Americans in 1865, an accomplishment that was probably the most revolutionary action in our history. Now, Truth was also an early advocate for women's rights. She addressed the 1851 Ohio Women's Rights Convention, arguing that women should have rights as well as men. Jesus, she pointed out, came into the world through God and a woman who bore him. Man, she asked, where is your part? She was particularly active in women's rights organizations after the Civil War, traveling extensively, I heard Mother Platt, traveling extensively to advance women's issues. In 1872, she joined Susan B. Anthony and others in an effort to vote in the presidential election. As Sojourner Truth recognized, women of all backgrounds were pinched out of the political process in the 19th century. Like Sojourner Truth, many responded by becoming very active in voluntary associations of all types. Women worked in and ran a variety of charities aimed at moral improvement and helping the less fortunate. They founded women's clubs all over the country to bring women together to do good works. They also advocated for reforms that would improve the lives of families and children. They increasingly saw suffrage as key to enacting other reforms. In the latter part of the 19th century, one of the strategies employed by suffragettes was to change state suffrage laws while pushing forward the slow process of amending the U.S. Constitution. Susan B. Anthony, president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, worked tirelessly for suffrage for more than half a century. She was a fearless woman with a wry wit. In 1872, she and other women were arrested in Rochester for voting. Anthony refused to pay her streetcar fare to the police station because she was, quote, traveling under protest at the government's expense. Anthony took a long railroad trip to Oregon on 3 occasions to advocate for the vote for Oregon women. On her last visit in 1905, which was a year before her death, she and the National American Women's Suffrage Association worked with Oregonian Esther Pohl, later Esther Pohl Lovejoy, and other members of the Portland Women's Club, among others, on an unsuccessful suffrage campaign. Who's heard of Esther Pohl? Oh, somebody has. Esther Pohl was born in 1869 in a logging camp in Washington Territory to working class parents. She was a brilliant student who worked as a department store clerk to put herself through medical school. In 1907, she became the Portland City Health Officer, which she was the first woman in the U.S. to head the health bureau of a major city. Pohl was president of the Medical Club of Portland and a member of the Portland Women's Club and the Council of Jewish Women, all organizations that she counted on to support her health initiatives to protect children from disease, inspect milk, and provide safe drinking water. After numerous failures to pass suffrage, Pohl and other members of the Portland Women's Club changed the suffrage strategy. Previous campaigns had focused on quietly winning over wealthy and educated voters. In 1912, the Portland Women's Club built a grassroots coalition of groups across the state to support suffrage, 70 altogether and 47 outside of Portland. One member of the coalition was the Chinese American Equal Suffrage Society. In this photograph, we see members of the society who joined white suffragettes, including Cole, for a suffragette luncheon, a public crossing of racial lines that was unheard of in Oregon in 1912. The coalition also included the Colored Women's Equal Suffrage Association, the Oregon State Grange, the Oregon Federation of Labor, and Everybody's Equal Suffrage League that Cole started to represent wage-earning women. To be accessible to working women, Everybody's Equal Suffrage League charged 25 cents for a lifetime membership, something an AO's probably not going to want to do, instead of the customary several dollars a month, and made every member a vice president. It quickly attracted hundreds of enthusiastic vice presidents around the state who came up with some excellent organizing strategies. With strong support from the National American Women's Suffrage Association, the campaign was successful and Oregon women won the vote in 1912. As a result of the work of Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, Esther Cole, and thousands of other individuals working in many nonprofits, the U.S. Constitution was amended in 1920 to give women the right to vote. So one of the sites where Sojourner Truth, here we are voting. One of the sites where Sojourner Truth spoke for women's rights in 1853 was the Broadway Tabernacle, a nonprofit congregational church in New York City. Church members there formed the American Missionary Association, which took a prominent role in abolishing slavery and promoting Black education and racial equality. After the Civil War, the AMA founded more than 500 schools and colleges for freed people in the South, including Fisk University in Nashville. One of the people educated at Fisk University was W.E.B. Du Bois. Who's heard of Du Bois? I suspect some people have. All right, good. Du Bois was the most prominent intellectual leader and political activist among African Americans in the first half of the 20th century. He was the first African American to earn a doctorate at Harvard. It was in history, yay. In 1909, he co-founded the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, to combat lynching and to work for racial equality. For 25 years, Du Bois was the editor-in-chief of its publication, The Crisis. The organization grew rapidly and by 1919 had 90,000 members in more than 300 local branches. Most people credit its report on ending 30 years of lynching from 1889 to 1919 with drastically decreasing the incidence of lynching. During the 1930s and 40s, the NAACP successfully challenged a variety of segregationist practices in the courts. These victories paved the way for its chief counsel, Thurgood Marshall, to persuade the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn the separate but equal doctrine in the Brown school desegregation case in 1954. Marshall was later appointed to be the first Black justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. The Portland chapter of the NAACP was founded in 1914 with Dr. J.N. Merriman as president and Beatrice Morrow Kennedy as first secretary. So who's heard of Kennedy? Ah, not so many people. Well, you should. Kennedy was born and went to college in Texas, taught briefly in Oklahoma, and studied music in Chicago. She came to Portland in 1912 to marry Edward Kennedy, who was the founder and editor of the Advocate, a Black newspaper. She became assistant editor and later editor and owner of the Advocate. In 1922, she became the first African-American woman to graduate from law school in Portland, in Oregon. After the establishment of the Portland NAACP in 1914, Kennedy, at age 25, quickly emerged as its most powerful voice. She headed the NAACP's protest against the showing of the racist film, The Birth of a Nation, and waged a 15-year campaign to limit the showing of that film. She successfully challenged the exclusion of Black children from public schools in Longview, Washington, and Vernonia, Oregon. Kennedy was an elegant woman who hosted very popular Sunday afternoon interracial salons attended by Black, white, Chinese, and Japanese guests. She was also a strong woman who was unafraid to speak her mind. In 1924, she wrote a scathing editorial response in the Advocate to a newspaper editor in Grants Pass who had written an article entitled "Keeping Grants Pass White." Writing 6 years after the end of World War I, Kennedy castigated the editor by saying that the article is the child of a twisted and dwarfed brain, or the brain of a jackass who, surprise, does not know the world war has ended. In her work with the NAACP, Kennedy and others wrapped up a 30-year battle by persuading Oregon voters in 1925 to repeal a state constitutional provision that excluded African Americans from living in Oregon, rarely enforced the highly offensive law, and in 1927 to repeal a state constitutional provision that prohibited Black people from voting. Also unenforceable because it had been overridden by the U.S. constitutional amendment, but highly offensive. Kennedy moved to Los Angeles in 1936, but the Portland NAACP continued its work against discrimination in Oregon. For more than 30 years, the NAACP, with assistance from numerous Black ministers and other organizations, had attempted to persuade the legislature to ban discrimination in public accommodations, like we're seeing here. It was finally successful in 1953. The Black United Fund, one of your NAO members, is an heir to this tradition, as are we all. In other sections of the country, segregation laws remained in effect. Lillian Waycock Johnson, a Tennessee clubwoman and suffragette who was very active in promoting women's education in Tennessee, donated land in eastern Tennessee in the early 1930s to a new nonprofit called the Highlander Folk School. Highlander offered workshops for activists, initially in the labor movement and later in the civil rights movement. At the end of a weekend civil rights workshop in the mid-1950s, which Johnson herself attended, the trainer asked the group what their next steps were as they took back what they had learned to their communities. Sound familiar? One woman, a seamstress and NAACP member, who's seated here on the far right, answered that she didn't know what she was going to do next. She was thinking about it. 4 months later, she refused to yield her seat on a public bus to a white passenger. Her name is Rosa Parks. Parks' arrest for her refusal to give up her seat, as most of us know, triggered the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. Now, the boycott was called by the Women's Political Council, a nonprofit organization of professional African-American women in Montgomery. The night of Parks' arrest, the council mimeographed and over the next couple days distributed 35,000 flyers calling for a boycott the following Monday. For those of you who don't know what a mimeograph machine is, they work like this. On Monday, the buses coming out of the Black section of town were empty. The boycott was subsequently successfully led by the Montgomery Improvement Association, a new nonprofit association of ministers and civil rights leaders, headed by a 26-year-old minister, Dr. Martin Luther King. Inspired by the success of the boycott, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, also led by Dr. King, the NAACP, and numerous other organizations spent 10 years exposing segregation. They persuaded Congress to enact federal civil rights legislation that protected the rights of all citizens, regardless of race, to use public accommodations, to vote, and to be employed. So, what Peter Williams Jr., Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, Esther Cole, W.E.B. Du Bois, Beatrice Morrow Kennedy, Lillian Waycock Johnson, Rosa Parks, Dr. Martin Luther King, and many others teach us is the importance of nonprofit organizations in American life. We can draw several lessons from this very rich history. In U.S. culture, we place a great deal of emphasis on individualism, don't we? We admire the self-made person getting ahead in business, individual civil rights to speak, worship, and vote freely, and individuality in our styles and preferences. We consider rugged individualism to be virtuous. Individualism is often a good thing, but Americans' strong identification with individualism tends to obscure the critical ways that we are connected to one another and the tremendous importance of community. Our history of voluntary associations reveals to us this side of ourselves. Although we're not the only country in the world to have non-governmental organizations, we have an unusually strong tradition of reliance on nonprofits to connect us together so that we can enhance our world. And nonprofits have delivered in huge ways, triggering the abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, and black civil rights are only a few examples. In seeking to better our world, I'd also suggest we not only help our communities, but also nurture and improve part of ourselves. Our souls, as Sojourner Truth might tell us. Embedded in our nonprofit history is a second lesson. Not only do nonprofits benefit our world and ourselves, but our nonprofit heritage helps us to understand our interconnections with each other and the ways that the work of one organization might build on or support the work of another. Reform-minded churches spawned the American Missionary Association that founded the college that educated W.E.B. Du Bois, who co-founded the NAACP. And look what that organization did. After years of failing to achieve suffrage, the Portland Women's Club was successful when it put together a voluntary coalition that crossed racial and class lines. Rosa Parks was influenced both by her membership in the NAACP and by the Highlander Workshop. The Women's Political Council initiated, and the Montgomery Improvement Association then successfully managed the boycott following her arrest. We apply these lessons today, don't we? When we talk about interdependence, coalitions, and collaboration. Park's story also reminds us that we often have no idea how extensive the impact is of our work. The Highlander Center did not know when Parks left its workshop what she would do. Although we may see some of our short-term results, we often don't get to see the long-term consequences of our work. For example, when a child is nurtured by NAO member Janus Youth Programs, a woman is empowered by your member, Center Against Rape and Domestic Violence, or a man finds work after participating in job assistance programs provided by your member, Hacienda CDC. Your members perform these and many other services. Who knows the full extent of what all these services do for the people they touch and all those people touch? Look around the room. Really, look around this room. What would we see if we could somehow see the full, long-range impact of all that all of us do? Every person in this room is a part of this, our nonprofit tradition. Most of us were served by nonprofits as young people, through our churches, scouts, youth sports, scholarships, and many other ways. Today, we participate in giving back, serving on nonprofit boards, working for a nonprofit, or volunteering for and donating to nonprofits. Every person in this room is also part of an important new development in the nonprofit world. Until about 30 years ago, there was virtually no recognition of the nonprofit sector as a distinct segment in American public life. In the early 1980s, scholars began to identify the nonprofit world as a separate sector of the community, generally positioning it alongside government and business as the three sectors of society. As the nonprofit sector has developed an institutional structure, it has, especially in the last 7 years, taken a new step forward. Business has always had strong advocates for its interests. National Association of Manufacturers, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, many powerful business leagues. Until recently, the nonprofit sector had no real public voice. The sector is developing some national advocacy presence with nonprofits like Council on Foundation and Independent Sector. You today are part of building a new chapter in Oregon nonprofit history by participating in the Nonprofit Association of Oregon. I'm personally delighted to see NAO become our advocacy voice for Oregon nonprofits. We need one. I've told only a very small part of the nonprofit story today, but I hope it's opened a portal into a new understanding of who we are as Americans. What we name and claim as our identity influences how we act and how others respond to us and act. The next time someone asks you what you're proud of about being an American, remember the work that so many who have come before us have done and the work that we do. We Americans are a people that care about our communities and our world, and our nonprofit heritage is our proof. Join me in claiming this as part of our American identity. And thank you for all that you do to make it so.
event. They're from the International Visitor Leadership Program, and they're here learning about the role of NGOs in promoting global women's issues. International Visitor Leadership is a U.S. State Department program, and the World Affairs Council is the host in Oregon. So I'd love if you could stand, and we'd love to welcome you. Just one more mention on the photo booth. If you haven't had your picture taken with a mission impact statement, we encourage you to do that. And Rick has a few more words to say.
You can't talk about nonprofit history and not talk about the settlement.
Give me more 30 minutes.
The settlement house, Jane Addams, direct link to Neighborhood House, the first settlement house in Oregon. That's not mine. And in going through the names of our board members, we left a few out, and I'd like to recognize them and ask them to stand again. Eric Vines, our new vice president. Michael Kaplan, our treasurer. And I want to finish by recognizing Kathy Jaworski, our outgoing president. Getting to know Kathy has been one of the great joys of serving on the Nonprofit Association Board. She's provided really outstanding leadership and has helped lead us through the transition from tax to NAO. And without her, I don't think we would be here as strong as we are today. So Kathy, thank you very much. So now we'll take a break.